where the purpose of the hearing is to determine the guilt or the innocence of persons accused of criminal conduct. This case primarily deals with Joshlin, a young child that went missing and is still missing. Now, there's a popular saying which often is overused, and it says that it takes a village to raise a child. It implies, among other meanings, that an individual is not an island, that a person is a person through other persons to belong to, and that perhaps most importantly, that a child must be protected by those around it in order to truly thrive in society. It has other implications too, if we take it seriously. For a village to raise a child, that village must be healthy, and the material conditions of that village must be such that the child can flourish. I remind ourselves that we're dealing here with the life of a child. In this matter, it takes in a certain point in time. Here we have a village where a child was not safe. This is not necessarily because of the community in which she was born and lived, as we can freely see through the public interest in the case, but because of multiple factors, including the material conditions of the community in which Joshlin was raised. A village does not exist in a vacuum, and nor is a child raised in a village alone. It is and remains the responsibility of the state, and in particular, taking it from myself, the judicial system, to ensure that children are protected. It becomes our responsibility that every child that grows up in our village, in which it was protected to live as a citizen in society, that defends that protection. It is our role to ensure that all are protected, so that every child that is raised in our village can turn into an active, contributing member of society. And it's for one of these reasons that the act for which the three individuals are charged were enacted, I turn my attention to the preamble to the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking Persons Act, number 7 of 2013. And it reads, to give effect to the Republic's obligations concerning the trafficking of persons in terms of international agreements, to provide for an offence of trafficking in persons and other offences associated with trafficking in persons, to provide for penalties that may be imposed in respect of the offences, to provide for measures to protect and assist victims of trafficking in persons, to provide for coordinated implementation, application and administration of the Act, and to prevent and combat the trafficking in persons within or across the borders of the Republic, and to provide for matters connected therewith. Section 41(1)(b) of this Act provides for the establishment of an integrated information system to facilitate the effective monitoring and implementation of the Act, and to recommend interventions relating to trafficking in persons by collating and analyzing the information obtained in terms of sections 25(4)(c), 39(44)(1)(d), 44(5)(c), 44(7)(c), with a view to determining, amongst others, the establishment of integrated information systems, and so forth. The Act further provides for strict application, therefore the development of the monitoring systems. I may have done a cursory research, but I couldn't find a system that was accessible and operational in the implementation of the Act. Maybe it's time that something is done, as this is not an isolated case. Could be, as Ms. Swanepoel on behalf of the state argued, it's the first of its kind, but maybe we don't know, because it's not properly recorded, in order for us to be able to combat it effectively. Turning to the individuals before the court and the charges they face, Mr. Apollos was at the time of the charge 31 years old. Mr. Van Rijn was 27, and Ms. Smith was 33. I noted the other day when I signed the warrant of detention postponing the matter to today, that it was a birthday yesterday, on the 1st of May. That's also, I was reminded of that when I looked at the evidence of Ms. Michaela Daniels in the manner in which the date of birth was reflected. So if at the rest she was 33, she would have been 35 yesterday. I mentioned the ages of the three individuals as it relates to the charge itself as well. They are charged with different offences and alternatives, which I do not deem necessary to read the whole indictment for today's proceedings. And it is that between the 18th and 19th of February 2024 in the Tsitsi area in Malopos, that Joshlin Smith, who was 6 years old at the time, born on the 23rd of October 2017, was trafficked. Therefore, the charges are brought under Section 4, 10(1)(b), rape with 4(1), 10(1)(c), rape with 4(1) in the Act. So it's the main and the alternate charges, and there was a second charge of kidnapping. Now, in the main and alternate charges, 3 components needs to be proven by the state. And I will turn to the question whether the means is in fact a necessary element when the victim is a child. But generally, the state needs to prove what was done, as the provisions of the Act is that any person who delivers, recruits, transports, transfers, harbors, sells, exchanges, leases, or receives another person. How? The means. And it then gives you a number of alternates, which would include kidnapping, the abuse of power, the direct or indirect giving or receiving of payments, and alike. And then the purpose, why it is done. It is clear that, therefore, that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that an accused person committed any one of the listed acts, as set out in the indictment, by using any one of the listed means with a purpose or with an exploitative purpose. Now, it was argued on behalf of the state that international law does not require that in the event where the victim is a child, the means must be proven. And they relied specifically with reference to Section 11(1) of the Act. In this regard, on the unreported decision in State versus Becky Wellington, Ashana, and 2 others. It's an unreported case from the Eastern Cape High Court sitting in Calais, under case number CC 16/2018 ECG Judgment was delivered on the 14th of June 2022. I paused to note that unfortunately it seems that some of the judgments in the Eastern Cape didn't find its way into Saturday. I actually took it up with my colleagues in the Eastern Cape yesterday to alert them to it. This judgment was delivered by Joshlin, as his name was. And it dealt specifically with the charge under Section 4.1 as we are dealing with here. And the judge gave a full analysis of the law as well as the academic articles and referenced the international instruments. He came to the conclusion that where a victim is a child, it is not necessary to establish that one or more of the sections of the Act was complied with. For purposes of the judgment here, this is an extemporary judgment. There's no need to explain further because it's clearly set out in Masala by Joshlin. However, it's important that for the reasons set out there, I'm in full agreement with the exposition of the law and the conclusion reached by the court in Masala. And insofar as it relates to this case, it is the law that I will apply to that extent. Means that there is a difference in the elements to be proven by the state where the victim is a child. It will become apparent later why I find it necessary to draw that distinction. Now, in an attempt to discharge the onus that rests on the state, they call 35 witnesses, handed in 42 documentary exhibits, 5 physical exhibits. We attended to an inspection in Logo, and this trial so far lasted us 35 days. I did not count the hours, but it was many. There was no evidence presented on behalf of the defense. The effect thereof was that the majority of the evidence either became common cause or it stands undisputed before the court. I'm conscious of the fact that insofar as it relates to certain witnesses, that I need to evaluate the credibility and reliability of those witnesses carefully. And I shall return to those witnesses in particular later. I have decided to state the facts which are common cause and all undisputed before the court, not as is customarily done in a summary trial, where one would summarize the evidence fully. but rather to integrate the evidence of the different witnesses in a timeline from which I shall then draw conclusions and inferences at the end of the judgment. So I decided to start much earlier on my timeline from what the state suggested in the evidence that was produced before me. From the evidence of Ms. Celise Brown, who is employed as a social worker in the Department of Social Development, Ms. Smith became known to the department as a person in need of support as far back as 2016. She was the adopted child of her grandmother, and from the file contents, as Ms. Mbambo was not in the employ of the department at the time, a predecessor recorded the information. Ms. Smith had an addiction problem that caused further tension in the relationship with her grandmother. As I've indicated, Ms. Mbambo doesn't have personal knowledge of the information, and strictly speaking, that evidence is hearsay. It's however not challenged. Firstly, and there's no prejudice to Ms. Smith in admitting the evidence. Therefore, the evidence would be admissible in terms of the evidence amendment order as hearsay evidence that is admissible. That was 2016. During 2017, the grandmother again reported to the department, stating that Ms. Smith had another child. That child was Joshlin. The older son was in the care of the grandmother, for whom she received a social grant. But she couldn't provide the whereabouts of Ms. Smith, although reporting that she recently had a child, but they didn't know where she was. On the 20th of March, the next year, 2018, so Joshlin would have been approximately 5 months old. Ms. Smith attended to the offices of the department to seek assistance, as she was allegedly in an abusive relationship and needed help. Also for her own substance addiction. By then, Joshlin's birth had not been registered. Ms. Smith was then assisted by the social workers to register Joshlin's birth and to assist Ms. Smith to be committed to a rehabilitation center. That's the first time we also hear the name Natasha Andrews. Because when Ms. Smith had to be committed, Joshlin was placed in the care of Natasha Andrews and her family. We heard the evidence of Miss Andrews that they attempted to adopt Joshlin during 2018, but the parents were uncooperative. But she didn't give us the date, specific date. She mentioned the year. That's confirmed by what had happened in 2018 with Miss Smith and Joshlin. It is important to note the relationship between Miss Andrews, Miss Smith and Joshlin, as that relationship between Miss Smith and Miss Andrews will become relevant later. However, although they didn't adopt Joshlin during school holidays and often over weekends, although Joshlin was staying with her mother, she would often spend time with the Andrews family. During 2023, just now a few years later, Joshlin was then in grade R. Then it became school holidays. In other words, longer periods to be spent with the Andrews family. Regular contact would be between Miss Smith and Miss Andrews. Fast forward to a cold morning in August of 2023. The temperature this morning was 5 degrees when I was driving in. Mr. Nico Stephen Kutsia was on his way to work. He hails from the Makoland, so does Miss Smith. He does general work at people's homes and is also an evangelist in the Christian faith. 2016 roundabout, he attended a memorial service at a funeral. That's where he met Miss Smith. Realizing that they were from the same area, they exchanged pleasantries. And although they didn't see each other regularly between then and 2023, when they would see each other, they were friendly. According to Mr. Kutsia, they could have been regarded as friends. And he referred to her, and she in turn, as his homie. During the process, she requested him to see whether he could procure a position for her doing domestic work with some of the people where he performed these tasks. On this morning that I spoke about, he was surprised to encounter her that time of the morning, as his initial impression was it was somebody jogging. She seemed upset and lamented about her unhappy family life. He wanted to know where she was coming from. And where she was going. He was unaware at the time where she resided. She pointed over her shoulder to a blue house and said she lived just behind that house. And she was on her way to do a cleaning job. She left the children with Buddha, Mr. Apollos. Because of this bad family situation she was in, she was going to have the children removed. Turned out later that reference was made to a child. The statement of Mr. Kutsia was handed in to evidence where it became apparent, but it's neither here nor there. In the bigger scheme of things, when he then inquired where to and to whom, she did not reply, but said she was waiting for people that were supposed to come, but they disappointed her. But in the event that they would now turn up, she would be prepared to accept less than the 20,000 rand and would be satisfied with 5,000 rand. She gesticulated with her hands and told him that in the next year, January or February, he will see what will happen in Middelbos and Diasville. It will look like a movie scene with cars and people. They will search, but not find. These were his exact words. She will let the child go far. He remembered her clothes, as it was unusual for the weather conditions at the time. He saw her again during the September school holidays of 2023, where he saw Joshlin, and he described her eyes as the most beautiful that he had seen. It sounds better in the Namakwaland way of expressing, as Mr. Kutsia did. Miss Laurentia Lombard, whose evidence I will deal with in detail later on, lives a stone's throw away from Miss Smith and Mr. Apollos. They were friends who shared a lot, but they were also drug buddies. They would see each other on a daily basis, using drugs. From the available evidence, Ms. Smith seems to have been the provider of the financial means and often supported Ms. Lombard with food for the children, for her children, Ms. Lombard's children. Ms. Lombard had four children, of which two was living with her, and a partner, a younger. On Sunday, the 18th of February 2024, the Apollos and Smith residence was visited by a detective inquiring about the loss of chickens on a nearby farm. The complainant in the chicken theft case was identified, and Miss Smith's response was that she couldn't believe that this complainant would point fingers at Mr. Apollos, and that she did not take revenge by informing the complainant's wife of his infidelity. Stronger words were used. This led to a heated argument between Mr. Apollos and Miss Smith that later on escalated to Miss Smith breaking the window and threatening to stab Mr. Apollos. After the breaking of the window, Miss Smith and Mr. Apollos were inside the house, where Miss Lombard could overhear a discussion between the two of them. They were talking about Joshlin. It's instructive to note that Mr. Apollos, in his statement that was admitted in the trial within a trial that was made to Colonel Pretorius, confirms a discussion in the vein as described by Miss Lombard. And in a separate interview with Captain Lombard with 1A, Mr. Apollos confirmed the argument and also confirmed that both of the children were there. Miss Paulina Chaucer, not knowing any of the dramatis personae, was on her way to have her hair done in the late afternoon, early evening, as the time is not, she's not certain of the time. On that Sunday, the 18th of February 2024. The route to the salon would take her past the rocks close to the house of Mr. Apollos and Miss Smith. She describes this argument and that Miss Smith dragged Joshlin towards the house and uttered the words, "Exhale your waste." I pause to note it's unclear whether these words were directed at Joshlin or Mr. Apollos, having regard to the genesis of the argument. It was heated, according to Miss Chaucer. She also recognizes Miss Lombard, or describes somebody that resembles Miss Lombard. It's also an aspect I will come back to later. According to Miss Lombard, Miss Smith then took Joshlin to a white polo vehicle and to a woman whom it would seem to be traditional dress. She had distinctive white spots on her face. She describes this person as a Sangoma due to the appearance. She saw Miss Smith receive something that she had placed in her pants, whereafter she returned to her house with Joshlin. She then tells us that she overheard Miss Smith telling Mr. Apollos that she received 20,000 rand. Miss Lombard then approached Miss Smith, whilst Mr. van Rijn was present, and upon inquiry, Miss Smith stated that she had sold her child Joshlin and had done something bad. Again, strong words were used. But for her silence, Miss Lombard will receive 1,000 rand and Mr. van Rijn 1,200 rand. According to her, both she and Mr. van Rijn accepted the offer. The next morning, earlier than usual, that was Monday the 19th of February 2024, Miss Lombard went around to the Smith residence, where she found Mr. Apollos, Mr. van Rijn, Miss Smith, and the 3 children of Miss Smith. According to her, Miss Smith would have given instructions of how the handover of Joshlin will take place around 2 o'clock the afternoon. Thereafter, Miss Smith left with the youngest of the 3 children. Both Joshlin and her older brother did not attend school that day. The reason for this non-attendance, given to different persons at different times, changed between unwell and dirty school clothes. Turning back to Miss Smith, she was working for Miss Colin Seegers and her daughter Kelly, performing general housework. On that morning, according to Miss Colin Seegers, Miss Smith arrived extraordinarily early. She received the keys to Kelly Seegers' house. Whether she went to work or not at Kelly Seegers' house became unclear at the later stage, because Kelly Seegers has a camera, CCTV, and no footage of Miss Smith can be found for the 19th of February on the recording. On the other side, in Middelbos, Joshlin was still at home, where Miss Lombard, Mr. Apollos, Mr. van Rijn were present. According to Miss Lombard, she exchanged a bag of hers for a quarter mandrax heroin, which was consumed by the 3 adults present. Cross-examination. It was disputed as to who partook in this consumption, but both Mr. Apollos and Mr. van Rijn, in the statements they made to Colonel Pretorius and Captain Seerquist, confirmed that consumption. Turning back to the events of the 19th, at some stage before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Miss Smith was back at Colin Seegers' house, where she borrowed 50 rand and made her way home. Miss Lombard narrates that it was then that Miss Smith took Joshlin to the car, the same white polo from the previous day. Mr. Apollos, Mr. van Rijn, and Nilo was present. According to Colin Seegers, Miss Smith was away for approximately a half to 3/4 of an hour. Miss Smith then returned back to her house in Middelbos, round about 5 o'clock, where after she, Mr. Apollos and Mr. Van Ryn took a gas canister to be filled. They bought some, took and smoked it. Mr. Apollos and Mr. Van Ryn had to collect money for items sold earlier, which included a microwave. It is interesting to note that Miss Lombard also refers to this. Joshlin was not home. Nobody is searching for Joshlin at that time. Miss Smith shows no concern. Mr. Apollos shows no concern. Mr. Apollos and Mr. Van Ryn later departed to Telmaki Street to go do their drugging thing for the rest of the evening. Exactly what time Miss Smith showed any interest in finding Joshlin is unclear. However, at approximately 8:20 that evening, she and another person, who could have been Namshla and Tinsley, attended at the residence of Miss Andrews. According to Miss Andrews, Miss Smith inquired whether Joshlin was with her. When asked about Miss Smith's demeanor, she said she did not seem anxious to her. This was an opinion expressed by the witness. I have indicated above the long relationship and close relationship between Miss Smith and Miss Andrews. Miss Tinsley and Miss Smith were searching at one stage, and at one stage they attended to a residence in Bitamukaba Street, which was a place identified where Joshlin could have been. Miss Tinsley's concern was that Miss Smith spent an inordinate long time inside the house, and that the search was not continuing. Upon inquiry from her as to what the reason for the delay was, she was told that Miss Smith was charging her phone. It was thereupon that Miss Tinsley insisted they inform the police. This is now approximately 9:30 in the evening. The complaint was attended by Sergeant Kobese and Constable Gongoda. They inquired at both the Zeeger's residences, and as Miss Smith did not have a photograph of Joshlin, they collected same from Miss Andrews. After all the administrative work was done, and Mr. Apollos eventually found in Telmaki Street, a statement was obtained for a missing persons report from Miss Smith. This was Exhibit QQ. What stood out in that statement was that Joshlin did not go to school because she was, I quote, not feeling well. When she returned approximately 13:50, according to the statement, Mr. Apollos was not at home. And then there's some vagueness in the statement as to whether she was asking about the whereabouts of Joshlin or not, and whether the father was looking for the child, referring to Mr. Apollos. But in the same statement, hence my confusion, it's also stated the father last saw the child at about 1300 hours, 1 o'clock. No mention is made of Mr. Van Rijn. After all the work was done by the police, Mr. Apollos and Miss Smith went to sleep and were searching for the night. According to Miss Andrews, she saw Miss Smith early the next morning, and again she did not look anxious. Now the police were mobilizing upon the missing persons report. Detective Molstein and Detective Sergeant Joshlin were on duty somewhere in the Swartland when they were called back to Saldanha. Detective Sergeant Molstein took a statement from Mr. Apollos. 3 things stood out. He said, Joshlin had a cold, makes no mention of Mr. Van Rijn, but at about 11 o'clock, he washed the children's clothes. Both of the children home, as well as himself, when Miss Smith returned at lunchtime, where she remained approximately 20 minutes. Detective Sergeant Joshlin went around to Miss Lombard. This statement brought a new issue to light: the presence of Mr. Van Rijn. The same morning, on the 20th of February, the class teacher, Miss Edna Maart, made contact with Miss Smith, and although she asked her twice about the absence of Joshlin at school the previous day, she received no answer. What also became apparent at the time, over and above a comment made by Miss Smith to Lieutenant Colonel Sabola, the station commissioner, about a child making her famous, neither Miss Smith, Miss Lombard, Mr. Apollos, or Mr. Van Rijn participated in the search. Although many, and I stress many, police officials, community members, people from afar were searching day and night. But let's get back to the day of the 20th, because that night Miss Smith slept at the home of Kelly Zegers, and she gave an interview. Her concern was that this is now Kelly's concern. Kelly Zegers is concerned because Miss Smith is also known as Kelly. Was that Miss Smith showed no emotion and did not appear to be concerned about the missing child. She slept like a baby, whilst Miss Zegers couldn't. In the interview, the moment suggestions were made that Mr. Apollos could have been involved, she became aggressive. Now, on the 23rd of February, this is now a few days later, Miss Smith encountered at least 2 persons who testified in court. I returned to Miss Celise Van Bambo, the social worker, because at the request of her manager, she had now become involved. And that was her first involvement with Miss Smith, to see what assistance they could give to Miss Smith, because she had a child that was missing. Miss Smith told the social worker that Joshlin did not go to school because the clothes were dirty and that she did not have any soap. A pause. Previous and in a later statement Miss Smith made, she says she went home at 10 to 2. Where did the soap come from that Mr. Apollos used at 11 o'clock? Whilst I'm at the evidence of Miss Bambo, she told us about the attempt she made to get Miss Smith into a safe place, but Miss Smith was uncooperative. On that same day, the teachers participated in a search, and Miss Mark was at the filling station, where suddenly Miss Smith appeared in the vehicle. It was then that she had told Miss Mark about this call she had from a seer that her child was on a ship on the way to West Africa. Then, before she alighted the vehicle, in a low tone, she said to Miss Mike, she must just remember that Buddha, Mr. Apollos, is innocent. Now, it would have been apparent from my summary so far that there were discrepancies in the reports that was now with the missing persons inquiry. From the 20th through to that Sunday, the 25th, Captain Lombard with 1A, I draw the distinction because Miss Lombard has 2 A's in her surname. Who is attached to the Provincial Organized Crime Kidnapping Task Team, who also then became the investigating officer at the later stage, or the lead investigator at the later stage. He had contact with Sergeant Milstein after difficulty in the beginning getting a hold of him, because Sergeant Milstein's telephone must have been overloaded with calls and so on. And offered his support to the team that was leading the missing persons investigation. Because, as the title of the unit is, they specialize in kidnapping cases and come from the high onto the stations. And during that period, Sergeant Milstein had relayed to him his concern about these prima facie discrepancies. He then decided, or it was then decided, that he should travel down to this area to interview Miss Smith and Mr. Pollis. That first trip then happened on Sunday, the 25th of February. At the time, when interviewing Mr. Pollis and Miss Smith, he was aware of the contents of the statements, the interactions with the missing persons team, as well as concerns about their demeanor and their conduct in general. This raised red flags for him. Mr. Pollis confirmed in that interview that the two children, Joshlin and my older brother, did not attend school because they were sick. And what he found strange was when he inquired from Mr. Pollis about his relationship with Joshlin, Mr. Pollis became evasive and referred the answer to that question to Miss Smith, who was outside at the time. He also confirmed that Miss Smith returned home during the course of the day to Smithton. And although he couldn't give an explanation as to when and how Joshlin disappeared, he stated that both him and Mr. Van Ryn took turns in watching Joshlin. Mr. Pollis also confirmed that he did not partake in the search. And he confirmed the presence of Ms. Lindbergh on that day. Ms. Smith appeared irritated and confirmed that Joshlin was left with Mr. Pollis and the smoking of the tip. Captain Lombard was surprised by a response to a question when Ms. Smith said, and I quote in Afrikaans, "Meneer, my kind is nie meer in Saldanha nie. Ek moet aangaan met my lewe. Ek het nog 2 kinders. Sir, my child is no longer in Saldanha. I must go on with my life. I have 2 other children." When he wanted to know, but how does she know that Joshlin is no longer in Saldanha, she responded, "Her child is gone. My kind is back." According to him, she was emotionless and cold, not being involved in the investigation before the attempts for clarifying issues. Then he wanted to take a supplementary statement from her, supplementing the statement that was made on the night of the 19th, early hours of the morning of the 20th, to Kubisi and Gogota, her response was even more surprising. She had no time to give another statement because she had to go to the Spur with Mr. Apollos. This didn't surprise him. Well, this was not the only surprising issue. As what he found strange, here we have a mother, but she's not asking for an update on the investigation or what new information is available, but rather she said that Joshlin made a focus. Michaela Daniels is a sister of Miss Smith. She happens to be a police official in the Northern Cape. The two of them spoke on the 26th of February 2024. So this is the day after Captain Lombard's interview, where the responses were given as I described above. Miss Smith informed her sister that Joshlin was still in the area and that someone wanted to sell her child and that she is in the informal settlement. But it is too heated in Saldanha at the time. When she wanted to inquire further, Miss Smith's response was that she knows Miss Daniels is a police official, and she's now asking her the same questions the police have already asked, so she's not going to answer. On the question as to why did Joshlin not attend school on the 19th of February, she was told that Joshlin's school uniform was dirty and that Miss Smith did not have the money for washing powder. I've already referred to the 11 o'clock issue in Mr. Apollos' first statement. On the 22nd of February, before this interview, attempts were made to obtain a statement from Mr. van Ryn, because one might find it strange as to why Mr. Lombard, or Captain Lombard, only spoke to Mr. Apollos and Mr. Smith, because there was not yet a statement of Mr. van Ryn. The response from Miss Smith to Miss Daniels about the sale of Joshlin becomes apparent and important because of what happened on the 22nd of February at the residence of Mr. van Ryn. When Sergeant Molstein arrived there, Mr. van Ryn spoke to members of the community, and in that conversation he already speculated about the sale of Joshlin. Sergeant Molstein, however, did not take a statement from Mr. van Ryn on the day, because his impression was that Mr. van Ryn was under the influence of drugs and he didn't want to take it further there. However, Mr. van Ryn did make a statement, and that was on the 29th of February to Detective Sergeant Philwe Segobe. denied any responsibility for what happened on the 19th. On the 2nd of March 2024, the then Minister of Police visited the area. But importantly, on that morning, Captain Lombard encountered Miss Smith at the police station. She was well dressed in a dark green dress and clearly had a hairdo. After some comments made by Captain Lombard as to how well she looked, she responded that Joshlin made her famous. I referred to the same sight and the same words to Lieutenant Colonel Sibola. This comment also found its way to Ms. Hanif, the so-called TikTok influencer. I'm just going to pause for a moment. I can see there's some activity going on. So, when I return, I'm going to take a bathroom break. Some people want a bathroom break. Let's open the exhibits. Kelly's warning statement and so on. When I return, I will continue on the events of the 3rd of March, because that led me to Ms. Hanif at the video. It's now 11:31. How long do you need? 10 minutes? 10 minutes, okay. Let's make it 11:45 rather. It's 11:32 now, it's a 13-minute break. 11:45 when I will return. Court,